at age 23, the skill of managing and leading people was the skill that I learnt.
Welcome to Long-Term Thinking for Business Success, a show for and by business owners. Each episode will explore how to beat the odds and create a sustainable business and the life we've dreamt of. Today's guest is Damian Scodella from Square Penny, a business he founded 14 years ago. Hi Damian, welcome to the Long-Term Thinking for Business Success podcast, and thanks for joining us today. Just to get things going and to start our conversation, can you tell us a little bit about Square Penny? What's the change or the vision you're trying to achieve or deliver to your clients, and who are the people that you really hope to serve?
Well, thank you, Rick. It's nice to be with you today. So Square Penny is an outsourced bookkeeping and CFO service business, providing small businesses the reliability in their financial administration. Been around since 2008, and what we've noticed is peace of mind. Like peace of mind to be able to go to sleep and actually have a decent night's sleep instead of thinking about, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to pay this bill, and I've got to raise this invoice, and that's not working, I've got to do payroll tomorrow. It's those things that we've been able to eliminate in business owners' minds, which has allowed them to then create a separation, which has then allowed them to grow their businesses or focus on other areas of their business that may not be working well at that point in time.
Yeah, I understand. We have the same principle with the role of marketing in the organisation. If we can help them take that stress out of their life, it frees them up to do other things.
And you'd be amazed at how much it actually does. Like you see business that is in a little bit of a mess in terms of process, financial process, and you clean that up and you turn it into a more standard process. Just the relief on the business owner is amazing to see it, and it translates into longevity of a client as well by doing the things that you say you're going to do for clients, which is one of the most important things that you need to do.
Yeah, that the personal impact that we can have on business owners is so profound and such an honour to work with them. Just to think back to really the origin journey or the start of Square Penny, what inspired you to start it? Was starting your own business something you'd always wanted to do, or are you, like many of us, accidental business owners?
It wasn't accidental. I didn't really like working for managers telling me what to do. I've never been great with authority, Rick, and consequently, my value set was very high. From if I delivered a piece of work, I wanted my manager to use that piece of work. I wanted it to be used. I wanted to be critiqued. I wanted to know how to improve it. And as I was working in for large corporates in the early days, the work just didn't get used. It didn't get used for whatever purposes. And so I really wanted to make a difference, and I wanted the work that I did do get used. And I didn't like being told what to do, and I took a leap of faith and resigned from the role that I had. I never had an intention of creating a business. I just wanted to do good quality work that I was in control of, and it helped people. And so I resigned, went and helped a couple of colleagues of mine that just needed some work done. I think one was a data cleansing project, and I was just cleansing data, thousands of lines of data, and that sort of kicked off the start of what I wanted to do. And I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I was good with numbers and process. And then like most things, you put the feelers out, people start to say, yeah, I need some help here, and friends needed help, and then friends of friends, and then friends of friends. And then within the first 6 months, I'd put my first staff member on because I just needed help. I couldn't do it by myself anymore. I was doing 60-hour weeks, and they were just too long days. And it was just too difficult to do. And you put your first person on, and then you start to transition some of your workload, and then you're going to get to more work to go and fill the void, and then transition more work. So we pretty quickly went to 4 staff. Now we're 30 odd staff, and we're a little bit more sophisticated with it now these days.
You started that story with talking about the data cleaning project you did, which isn't really in line with the outsourced financial management model that you now deliver. At what point in that early generation did you move from doing almost anything for anybody to realize the the sweet spot is the financial management, the processes to run that, and then the team to deliver that.
It was interesting, even in that data cleansing project, I recognized that in order to do more of it, you needed other people to help you.
Yep.
So I got the first 4 weeks worth of work and realized you can only data cleanse for 10 hours a day. Then your mind gets fried. It's
10
just
hours
it's
is
just what
impressive.
well, yeah, back then there was a lot more energy as an early 30-year-old than today. What I recognized, then I was able to pick up a second project on the back of that, and I recognized that I could get that other project done, and I could do something else by targeting certain resources to help.
Yep.
And those the resources back then were mums returning to the workforce from maternity leave.
Yep.
She was doing that job while I was chasing the next piece of project work that was available. And pretty quickly early on, I recognized that if I wanted to do more work, I needed more people to help me. And there's also a link back here, Rick, that when I started working, not my first job, but my second job was actually managing people, not being a technical expert.
Yeah.
Say in accounting. And at age 23, the skill of managing and leading people was the skill that I learned. I still learned the technical side of accounting, but I wasn't a technical specialist. I was more of a manager of people. So for me, people were always going to be the thing that I work with the most because that's what I learned. That's where my skills were. So I never really thought ever in my head that I've got to do all this work always myself. I think because of that, how I developed my skill and the manager that I had really catapulted into recognizing that if you want to get more done, you need more support, and you need more support with better quality people than you, recognizing that you don't have the skill to do everything. And I think that's what really transitioned pretty quickly into that first official employee to grow that concept of scalability with not really thinking about how to scale.
Just in context again, thinking back, as you said, it's 14 years that you've had the business. What are you most proud of and why?
There's probably lots of things to be proud of. Probably the opportunity of providing to a particular demographic of our society that a lot of businesses neglected. Mums returning back to work.
Yeah.
The world's come a long way, but I still feel that the world hasn't quite still adjusted to the concept of flexible work model, working from home. The world hasn't quite adjusted to it because I think in order for it to work, you've got to believe in it.
Correct.
And if you don't believe in it, you can't. It doesn't work. So
it's got to be authentic and genuine to you. And
yeah.
I think listening back to your comments in terms of the people you're hoping to help and the value you're wanting to create, it's another target market that you identified that you could bring value to, and you've driven your whole business around that. So it's fantastic. Just thinking back over that 14 years, I'm sure it hasn't been smooth sailing. And in fact, previously you've shared some of the challenges you've had with clients, etc. But again, just sort of broadly thinking, what's one change you've made in the business that has been impactful in helping you get to 14 years? So what was a problem or challenge you had to face, and then how did you overcome that challenge to push through and get to where you are today?
Back in 2018, we were about 9 years in. They're heading to our 10th year, and one of our clients was a significant client for us. And at that time, we had about 9 staff, and I was heavily working on the tools with this one particular client. The client probably made up 60% of our revenue at the time. I just put up my first senior person in our business to really transition myself from this senior piece of work that I was doing. And in my head, I had the plan well thought out, identified the right person. It was working out swimmingly, and the person was employed, and the client came back to me and said to me, Damian, we're taking a different direction. We're not going to outsource our CFO service any longer. We want to maintain it. We want to keep it in-house. And so pretty much overnight, we went from a significant client to no significant client. I just employed our first senior person and really thought to myself, what have I done here? I've made a commitment to someone, and we've just lost our largest customer, 60% of our revenue. Yeah.
Huge.
And we also, mind you, at the same time, we had 9 staff as well. So we've got 9 livelihood. I take responsibility of employing someone extremely high and the livelihood that you impact. And I didn't want to let that go. One of my thoughts were, I never want to place myself. I never want to place anyone that's employed by square penny in that situation ever again. As they say in the classic, Rick, I got on my bike and started pedaling fast. and we went from 9 staff to 20 staff within
Wow.
6 months, and almost pushed too hard and almost fell off my bike. We grew too fast, and we didn't have all the fundamentals in place. We didn't have all the processes that we've got in place today. And I needed more support. I needed not more support from a team. I needed more support from more of a global view, and met a strategy coach. And at the time, I didn't quite value coaching that much. A bit like I never liked being told what to do. It really extended into that. I met someone in the April, pretty much a couple of days after I finished up with the client, a strategic journey. And part of that journey was setting a 5-year plan and what do you want to achieve in 5 years. And I know it's very cliche and we all do it. Majority of us probably don't go anywhere near delivering it. We set out on that path. Uh, Both organizations needed to sort of break down the walls. I probably needed to be hit around the head a little bit, needed to listen a lot more, but that was shown to me by actions and what the outcomes were. If we did this, then here's your outcome. If you did that, then that would be the outcome. And that was probably the biggest change for me, getting support for me individually as a manager and an owner. And if we didn't change the course of events, we just kept doing the same things, and it may result to be fortuitous, or it might not, and it's less likely than likely. So we set out on that path, and we sort of tore the walls down and rebuilt it, and we moved to just basic activity of, instead of just working on an hourly rate, moving to a fixed fee. And not many people have sort of done that, more frequent now, but then putting the systems in place that reflected those changes. And then you continue to evolve, and it was an organization that I work with. And as you achieved one thing, you went to the next thing. The growth from sort of the April 2018 to where we are today, we're probably yielding more for the hours that we do. We're at 33 staff, I think now. We're more than double the size. Our yields have improved, our processes improved.
Fantastic.
But it's also part of recognizing who you are and where your strengths are. And I think I'm so much more wiser for the experience. And part of that experience was in 2020, the question being asked of me, Damian, are you the best person to lead your business?
Wow, that's a challenging question to ask a
Very
founder.
challenging question. And I took it as offense. I was offended. When you look back, say, okay, well, am I the best person? I was the best salesperson for our business, but I wasn't the best process person or the best operational person for our business. So sort of midway through 2020, we started talking about who is the best, who in the team is the best, and then start to sort of slot in people into those roles, and then work towards filling those roles with process change. And glad that I resigned as CEO in December 2020. Trish Catlin, who was working with us for a couple of years, took on the CEO role at the start of 2021, and it's probably been the second momentous change in our process.
We'll come back to that change in a moment, because I just want to go all the way back. You mentioned that you went from losing your most significant client 6 months later, you had 20 odd clients.
So we had 9 staff, and then we went to 20 staff.
Right. So, well, that must have driven a massive increase in clients as well.
Yes.
What was instrumental or impactful in driving that growth? Was it just a hard slog of you walking the pavements, or was there a more intentional, strategic approach to what you did?
I've always been a guy that's operated really well working from behind. I've never been a great front runner, but if I can see a target in front of me, I know I can get closer to it and just chip away, and I'll get there. And so I knew I never wanted to be positioned in that place ever again where we're so heavily reliant. And it was actually just doing a lot of the small things, meeting people that I wasn't meeting. The volumes of meeting increased because I have more time now. And if I didn't increase the volume of activity, then I wouldn't be able to meet the volume of people and not be provided some of the opportunities. So my volume of activity just ramped up dramatically because I had all this time back, because I was no longer on the tools. I was completely off the tools, not deliberately. It wasn't a planned event. But I also needed to realize that I never wanted to be put in that position ever again. So we then started to diversify in terms of size of clients. So if we lost that significant clients, we probably picked up 20 clients that made up that value. So you spread the risk.
Right.
But it was all done through good old-fashioned networking, meeting people, building relationships, continuing to build relationships over and over and over again. And that's what really has driven that growth. Right. But it's really driven the growth of our business building relationships and continuing to do that over and over and over again has really driven growth in our business. And I believe it'll still continue to drive growth in our business.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's the testament to the consistent 1% changes can drive significant growth.
Can be boring, Rick. You've got to get used to it being boring. And I think that's one of the hardest things that we deal with, that we don't want to be bored. But unfortunately, the game that we're in is not about getting 15, 20% swings all the time. You just want to get the 1%, 2% swings consistent, but it's hard to be consistent.
That's a fundamental principle for us in terms of sustainable growth. We talk a lot about the feast and famine of lead generation. You go out, win work, and suddenly you're prosecuting that work. And you look at your pipeline a month later and there's nothing there. So we try to drive a consistent approach to marketing throughout a business rather than focus on it, win work, and then it dries down.
Yep.
I did, just to again jump back into that period, it sounds like because you had a number of staff members already in the business, when you won new work, it did need you to step in and do the work there. So it sounds like one of the changes in that period was you didn't step back into being on the tools. You've kept yourself out and on the business. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, in part. I still did a little bit of tool work because unfortunately you don't get a client today and then it's all harmonious for 4 weeks and then you get a new client and then next client starts 4 weeks later. Unfortunately, you'd be aware of this. Clients don't come when you want them to come. They come when we don't want them to come. So you've got to still facilitate them. Every time there was an overlap of a brand new client, I would step in and fill the void, allowing me to create the solution, whether that was moving staff around or employing a staff member. But I've never lost sight of continuing to grow. I've never turned off the growth tab ever.
Just to jump back a little bit again on parts of that story, one of the things that we most common hear from business owners, what helps them create success, is the embedding of systems and processes into their business. And this is something that you mentioned as well. So can you think back again over the years, has there been any specific systems or processes that you've embedded into Square Penny that has been able to drive your sustainable success? And whether they're operational in the way your team prosecutes the work, or it's an HR recruitment process, or it's a marketing process, broadly thinking about the business as a whole, what's been the most impactful system or process that you've put in?
I was fortunate enough that when I was learning my skill of bookkeeping, that I had an organization that was a colleague of mine who had great process, and that's what she built her business on. So I was able to license some process from that business from day dot. So the process of bookkeeping, process of analysis, I was able to license that from her. So that gave us some great day-to-day process to follow. Yes, we've adjusted and molded it to what we do now. I would still think that 60 to 70% of our processes still are abiding by what we licensed right at the start. The other piece of process change was about when we got to 8 staff. Then we started to need some more HR process around what we did. So we really focused on finding a piece of HR software that facilitated our HR process. Now, it was a little bit early to go with that software. What it's allowed us to do is it's allowed us to go from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 so much easier. And going from 30 to 50, which is our next aspiration, we will go there very simply because of what we did back at 10 staff. We went a little bit early, but sometimes you can't get the timing right. In hindsight, we went at the right time, but at the time, it just created a little bit more burden. We didn't quite have the structure of teams that we've got now for people to help facilitate implementation. That was the biggest change. And because we're a people-based business, we needed to have people-based systems to really support our people. That was the biggest change. There was a product called HR Central.
Could you just explain to the listeners what process or that system enable in the business?
So you can onboard a staff member very easily from some electronic forms. Electronic forms get fed into the software. The electronic information then feeds into the ATO system and feeds into your financial system. So you're only data entering one time. The other part is employee policies. So policy is always continuing to change. You need to adjust and adapt to circumstances. The policy on the system, it's easy. Instead of sending a Word document in PDF form to 30 people and then asking those 30 people to sign, you now can put it on the platform. People can read it. It's electronically signed. And so then you can monitor who's read, who hasn't read, and then you can follow up accordingly. So your time is then split on following it up through a system and using the system to support your follow-up, and it's allowed the scalability.
I've got a feeling that the changing from founder CEO to founder and BDM is going to be the answer to this question, and it might be a good segue to tell us a bit more about how you've transitioned to Trish. But in creating a sustainable company, a company that has the potential to last decades or even generations, the role of the founder continually changes. Can you think back through over the last 14 years, what have been some of the most significant changes in your role? And were they intentional changes, i.e. planned and considered, like it sounds like Trish was, or were they driven through circumstances and specific events?
For the first 10 years up to 2018, they were done through specific events and moments. From 2018, a clear plan moving forward around shifting my skill set to an area where the business could take advantage of it, removing myself from those areas that wasn't my strong point. Obviously, the CEO and Trish taking on the operations of our business, and I mean the operations. I say this to a lot of people. I'm an employee of my own business, continue to be the founder, but the role I play today is the business development role, and I take that as a function, and I'm the employee of that function, and I report to the CEO on that, and that's been well planned. We've now got an evolution of that where I've replaced myself once again, and I've brought in another BD person to replace the activities of BD that I have been doing, and once again, that has been well planned. Some people might say, what are you going to do now, Damian? There's plenty to do. A bit of a sabbatical in Italy for a little while will take care of that. Building that business is not only the two roles that I have been replaced in, it's also the implementation of putting a board structure in place to help fill a strategic void around an advisory board as well, which we put in place in November. Now looking at other opportunities, other different service offerings that could complement the business over time. So I don't see myself as extricating myself as a business. I just see it as giving other people opportunity, which allows me to then go and find other opportunities to complement our business. And for me, it's about building a success of a business over longevity, not just to cash out tomorrow and you're done. Building a business to work over generations. That's still evolution to play out and what that looks like. We're in a really strong position with the caliber of staff that we have.
One of the points you mentioned in there was pre-2018, nothing was strategically planned versus having a strategic plan and following that. What was the journey from Square Penny in an unplanned environment, probably pretty reactive to fires as they came up, versus the last few years where you've been far more considered and intentional with your behaviours and actions?
The two different periods of time aren't too dissimilar. Obviously, the period from 2018 onwards, we were guided a lot more around decisions being better considered, well thought out. You're taking a risk, but you've weighed up the benefits of that risk or looked at the downsides of the risk. The first part, you tend to not look at any risks. It's all upside. It's all fruitful upside. The journey of those first 10 years there's still an element of planning because it was always about growing and continuing to grow. Continuing to grow to 200 staff was just a number in my head that I always thought about, and still had aspirations of that. It was always about growth and employment. They were always linked together. It wasn't as planned. The management team was 2 of us back then. The management team now is 6. Right. So you still had people to bounce ideas off in the business. But when you've got a collective, the decision making slightly different to 2 people where one can sometimes influence. They look the same, smelt the same. Now you're a little bit more looking at the balance of probabilities, whereas before we took the risk, took the upside all the time and didn't worry about the downside. Now we probably consider both sides and still make the same decisions, but you're probably a more well thought out decision as opposed to before.
I think it sounds like you're more intentional and you're taking a long-term view where, yes, you might have had aspirations for it to be a 200-person company, but you're really making decisions on the day-to-day and the little bit of information in front of you, where now you're considering what's the long-term second and third ramifications of the decisions you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're now thinking about 2 years out, 3 years out. And a lot of things can still change in that time frame.
Sure.
You're thinking that far out. When you weigh up the time in a year, in our business, you generally lose December, January. Then most businesses lose public holiday weeks. You're almost only working a 40-week year. You've got to be thinking about, okay, what are we going to do at the start of 2024? What's that looking like? Whereas before, we would just be looking the next month, the next 2 months. Your forward planning certainly changes as well. So
Cool.
that's the exciting part, and that's the evolution. Start thinking further out. Your plans start orientated further out all the time.
Could also just double click back into the decision making. So pre-Trish, I imagine you were making definitely the strategic and bigger picture decisions about the business, but I imagine you were making lots of day-to-day decisions and team members would constantly come to you to help make decisions. How did the transition, I assume now you're trying to empower, not have empowered Trish to make all the decisions. How did that work both between you and Trish, and then how did it go in terms of transitioning your team to stop coming to you for all these decisions and go to Trish to make them?
What we did do, because we sort of shifted the evolution to groups of small, senior and smaller teams in our business since 2018, when we made that transition of me resigning as CEO, the transition wasn't as massive because people were already going to their senior managers for results. The biggest change was that business now is led by Trish and the management team. The biggest thing for me is that I had to fall in line with a set of rules. Now before,
Going back to the Damian that didn't want rules.
yeah, that's right. I made the rules, but now the biggest thing was I had to fall in line with a set of rules. I had to fall in line with what was protocol, what our policies were, and if I didn't, then what was the point of making this decision if I wasn't prepared to fall in line? Don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy, and it was probably a 3 to 4 month transition. I thought it was just going to be a nice little anniversary for 3 or 4 months, and it'd be great. It was a cutoff. It was a hard cutoff, and I, when but you don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
I knew, but I didn't acknowledge
Yeah.
that this was going to happen. So I had to adjust to it. One thing I've always done, I have really always given people the rein to allow people to make decisions, to allow people to make a mistake and not persecute them, because that's how I learnt. I think it's a valuable way of learning. I've employed that opportunity for others around me. Yeah, the transition wasn't massive for me because I've always empowered staff to do that, and we've got our systems and our processes where people are independent, because you have to be in a remote environment. You can't just have a central point, which works a lot more in an office environment. It was my issues of what I had to let go of and what I thought was important but wasn't really important. And it gets easier. Like it just gets easier as someone makes decisions and you see they're embraced by the business. You just step away, and people weren't coming to me for much at that stage anyway, so it made the transition even more so. But I'll tell you what, Rick, it's liberating.
I'm sure.
I'm not too sure if Trish would say it's liberating. They're all learning experiences, and I'm certainly there to help in any way to support that, because like anything, if you're not supporting people, how are you going to get the best out of the person? You can't just dump and run. I feel like the transitions worked well, and when you look back, yes, I think it's been a pretty good transition, which has then led the next transition of replacing myself in BD even so much easier, because now that's about nurturing and training and support, because business development is something. It's not really something you can get wrong. You can get way off track. It's a little bit different to running a business and dealing with staff related matters and dealing with operational related matters, dealing with financial related matters. You've got everything going on at the same time. Whereas in business development, you've only got one area, which is primarily relationships. So that this transition is even easier than that transition.
I'm just interested to understand a little bit more about you changing the BDM responsibilities, because that really moves you fundamentally to an employee completely if you've let go of that responsibility as a founder as well. How's that transition going, and where are you up to in that journey of really being able to step out of business development as well?
So we're only 6 weeks into that journey, so we're still early. One of the key things that we identified is being a subject matter expert in what you're talking about is so critical. BD element, like anything, you have the right skill, another BD person will uncover opportunities that you will never cover. And they'll uncover those opportunities in a different way to you. We don't need another Damian in this world. One's enough. I do my thing well, but someone else will do their thing well too, which will also complement square penny as well. So it's embracing that as well and supporting that, using some of the fundamentals that I've learned that work well. And that person picks up what they need to pick up out of that skills and complements what they need to do. We're now on this journey for the next 10 months of support and mentorship. And
That's great. And was this person also in an internal role change, or did you find and recruit somebody new for this role?
we looked externally to have a balanced view. And then has been with us for a couple of years. When we were having a chat about it in terms of where the role was going to go, I said to Dina, why don't you come out and have a look at a day in the life of business development and what it looks like? Doing that from an internal process and still having a look at what externally was available. Two philosophies in the world: there's make or there's buy. Recruiting externally was the buy, or you could bring someone that doesn't have the experience and development over time, or the third strategy was internally and provide that opportunity. And once we sort of looked at those three elements and tested what worked, it was obvious that being subject matter expert was the key. Learning that is a lifetime. So having that, I felt, was the most important skill out of all. And then BD and relationships we could teach, because most people in general are good humans. And so that's where we felt that internally, and we felt Dina was going to be the best candidate for us over the longevity of what we were trying to do.
Just one final question on this topic, and then we'll dive into the last question. So obviously you've been running BD, well, for the 14 years of the business. Have you processed out how business development works, or is it the Damian flair that drives it? And how are you teaching Adina to manage sales, or are you letting her find her own path to it?
One of the good things of working with a strategy coach is you identify a process and you follow a process. So we've got processes in place in order to make business development a more valued and more targeted, and that is by having recorded data and key data elements. For now, been recording data for 3 years.
So we know you've built it as a more sustainable part of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the data allows you to also say to yourself, and BD is a tough game, because sometimes you can be pounding pavement for no result, and then all of a sudden the walls just cave in, and then it's a flood. Also, recording data when you're not feeling so great in BD, or when it's a lull and nothing going on, you can use your data to say, yeah, I am doing a great job. I am doing what I need to do. I'm putting all the effort in where I should, because we know through history, human behavior and the way we work, as long as you do the right thing 100% of the time, will translate to business. So having that information, that process, then it's not a needle in a haystack approach with Dina. This is a process that works. Yes, you will need your little bit of flair and how you introduce yourself, but this is what we need to do. We need X amount of meetings, X amount of connections. Connections will lead to opportunities. Lead opportunities will lead to proposals. Proposals will then get converted. We've got that information to know whether we're doing enough or we're not doing enough. So that's provided a platform for the future. And what we will now then document is the admin component associated with doing that activity, and putting some of the words around that process.
Right. And the metrics or those points in that process that you just mentioned, are they the numbers that you were talking about, the data that you've been capturing for 3 years to measure the cadence of where you're up to in the process? And assuming you do A, you'll get B. If you get B, you'll hit C, and then eventually you'll hit the targets you want.
Absolutely correct. And so there's 5 or 6 key measures.
Yep.
And it was interesting, last couple of weeks, I said to myself, and I say to myself quite regularly, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough work? And the only way I could assess that is I go back and look at my numbers. And I said to myself, for the sake of this exercise, Rick, 111 leads in financial year last year. That's not closed business, but leads, 111 leads. We've done 40 so far. Actively another 8 months to go. Triple that, we'll be at 120. We're bang on target. I feel good about myself that I'm on target. Yes, it might be a little bit lean this week, last week, but the data then provides me the confidence that we are doing that. If those leads were down at 5 and 10 annualized, we'd be at half of them, then I'd be much more concerned. And that's the beauty of recording what you do to then be able to measure it, but you need data over a period of time to then measure your activity. And that's what we should be doing as all business owners, having some key metrics to measure our activity, to see how we're going, whether we're doing the right things, or we should be doing more of or less of.
Yeah, we have a weekly scorecard that it's the same sort of thing across the whole business of 8 metrics that are the key. metrics that we measure our business on.
And as a business owner, you be surprise yourself when you go look back at this data and go, oh, look, we've done this, done this. We haven't done enough here, and that can become your focus for the next 3, 6, 12 months
Correct.
because that information then provides you that useful targeting. A lot of people say they're busy. Well, tell me where you're busy, and a lot of people can't explain that because they haven't recorded the data.
Busy versus effective.
Oh, yes, correct.
Yeah. So just one final question. So thinking long-term perspective, and I now know that you definitely have a longer-term perspective of Square Penny. What's the next key strategic initiative that you're planning to implement to continue your success, and what do you hope that initiative will achieve?
I think there's two evolutions of this. There's the ongoing BD, but then there's probably an acquisition in line there that's something that we haven't done within Square Penny, as in buying another bookkeeping business, and that's something that's heavily on the cards to do that. In my previous life, I've had some experience with that, but that would probably be the next challenge. It would certainly create a whole set of unique issues that we've never experienced before. And that's something that we've started exploring it, but we'll really start to focus on that probably over the next 12 to 16 months in line with what our strategy is to continue the growth piece, because you've got to evolve. Yes, BD works, but it's also a little bit slower. So if you want to ramp up growth a little bit more, it is really exploring that acquisition element that's on the cards for the next 12 to 16 months.
Well, thank you very much, Damian. I really appreciate your insight, and there's heaps of nuggets that the listeners can take away, and we'll assess them and pull out some ideas from that. So thank you for joining us. And we didn't really get to explore your sabbatical in Italy, but I'm sure that's going to be an amazing time. So I wish you all the best, and I'm sure Trish will have the business running even more effectively by the time you come back.
Thanks, Rick. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to chatting to you next time.